We have Dan Henske here from the City Attorney's Office of the City of Santa Barbara. I asked him to join us because the city has recently had these ongoing conversations in city council meetings about what are being termed renovictions, related to tenant evictions and what landlords are able to do or not do when they are evicting a tenant. And so I wanted for Dan to just share about what those changes are and how those impact our local tenants and homelessness prevention.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Henske. I'm one of the assistant city attorneys for the city of Santa Barbara. And I had the privilege of presenting to the city council recently when they unanimously adopted some changes to the city's existing just cause eviction ordinance to address concerns that the council had heard from a number of residents about what has been called renoviction, which I'm going to describe as and this is my term, I'm not attributing it to the council, it's not a political term, but bad faith and attempts to get around the original council intent when it adopted the just cause eviction ordinance. Is it possible for me to share my screen? Do I have permissions to do that?
Yeah, I'll make you a co-host right now. There.
Okay. Let me share this screen with you. Can you see it? Is it showing up?
Yes.
Good. Okay, good. Okay. What I wanted to talk about, the ordinance that's in place, which can be found in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, chapter 26.50, and this is the table of contents is on the left-hand side of the screen. That's been on the books since 2020. And what it basically requires is that if a tenant who has been in place for more than 12 months is to be evicted, they have to be evicted for just cause. And there's two kinds of just cause, which are found in the definitions. And basically, I'm just going to go there real quick as we do that. Just cause includes a lot of what we would typically consider as at-fault just cause. That is typically a breach by the tenant of the rental agreement that the tenant has for the occupancy of the landlord's property. And things like non-payment of rent, destruction of property, illegal activities, all the typical kinds of things that could occur in a normal landlord-tenant relationship. That is what we would call at-fault just cause. Renovictions occur within the category of what we define as no-fault just cause. And so the amendments that the council made recently to the provisions of the municipal code relate to the definition of what is no-fault just cause. And frankly, the amendments that the council unanimously adopted were really quite simple and direct. And the council found that it was really what they had intended to do all along back when they adopted the original restrictions in 2020. And so those are on the right-hand kind of side of the screen. And what I put up there is an actual copy of the ordinance that was adopted. So what we did, and I'm just going to try and simplify it, is we added a good faith requirement. Now, as I explained to the council at the council meeting, you would think that good faith compliance with a law would be implied in any law that you adopt. But we needed, in this particular case, to add an express requirement that the landlord act in good faith. Good faith actually is a term that has both common sense meaning and legal meaning. And the legal meaning is almost identical to the common sense meaning, which is that you're acting with sincerity and honesty in your intention to comply with the requirements. And so really what we were saying is that if you're going to evict a tenant who's been there for a year, in order to do one of the authorized no fault reasons, you had to do it with honesty and sincerity, with an intent to fully comply with all the legal requirements of the law. So what are the requirements that are there existing in the existing law that we adopted, and how did we amend those? Well, first, one of the reasons that you can recover a premises is a good faith intent to use and occupy the premises for essentially the owner's own use. And by the owner's own use, we include the owner's family, immediate family, children, grandparents, a similar situation. In other words, the landlord wants to get back the property in order to use the property for the use and occupancy of the landlord or the landlord's property. The other was seeking in good faith, again, sincerely and honestly, to recover possession, to permanently remove the unit from the rental market. It's not going to be used to rent to anybody else. You might change it to a different use or whatever. That was the purpose of that, the particular section. The other, again, good faith compliance with the government order. Sometimes government orders do require that a premises be vacated. Instances might be, for example, the government needs to acquire the property for a public purpose, or there's a health and safety reason why it needs to be taken off the market. But the change that we made is that if there's a local ordinance that requires that the premises be vacated, that the local ordinance expressly require the vacation. In other words, we didn't want landlords to use this particular no fault exemption without an actual requirement that they do so. So that was the intention there. The most controversial one, and the one that generated the most discussion, was the fourth exemption. And this is the renoviction provision, the one that precludes renoviction, if you will, unless you go through this whole process. And so what we were learning is that there was an intent to remove or demolish. They say that we're going to remove or demolish, but then they wouldn't, or they would do it without having the permits. They would evict people prematurely. And so the council adopted additional requirements for a landlord who wants to evict a tenant for the purposes of demolishing or substantially remodeling the unit. And so what the council said is, number one, it has to be in good faith. Again, you have to do it with a sincere and honest intent to demolish and remove the unit. But they also added some additional requirements that were intended to provide greater tenant protection than exists under current state law. One is that they have to give the tenants early notice, advising the tenants of the intent to terminate the lease using this section. The early tenant eviction alert notice has to be given 60 days in advance. And that, again, that's part of the pre-existing law. If you'll notice, I'm scrolling. The early tenant eviction alert notice is already defined in the existing law. We didn't change anything with the new law. It was already there, and it's a notice that's given at least 60 days before the notice of termination that's required by the law in order to evict the tenant. they have to give the early eviction tenant, they have to have obtained all of the permits necessary to complete the demolition or substantial remodel. In other words, they need to get all the copies of all of the permits that are necessary to accomplish the work that needs to be done. I would point out that if there is a discretionary land use approval that is necessary, there may be greater protections under the zoning ordinances for the tenants in those circumstances, but I'm not going to go into those because those aren't part of the just cause ordinance. They're part of the land use regulations that pre-existed the adoption of the just cause eviction ordinance. They have to obtain all of the permits. They have to give the tenants copies of the permits along with the written notice stating the reasons for the termination. This notice is already required under the existing law, but we've added some additional provisions into the law that gives the tenant more information about what the landlord is actually doing. It has to talk about the type and scope of work to be performed, and it has to contain a statement of why the work cannot be reasonably accomplished in a safe manner with the tenant in place, and why the work requires the tenant to vacate from the residential property for more than 30 days in order to accomplish the work. That notice that contains that additional information has to be either contained in the notice that is given to the tenant, telling the tenant that they have to move out, and or it can be served concurrently with it. So it's either contained in that notice or provided at the same time as that notice. And just to recap a little bit, remember, in order to do a renoviction because you want to demolish or substantially remodel a present, you have to give two notices. The early notice that's just telling we're going to do this, we want to let you know. And then the second notice, which says, okay, now we've gotten the permits, we're really going to do it. Here are the permits, and this is the date that you have to be out of the premises. And the reason is it's going to, we can't do the work with you in there, and it's going to take more than 30 days. And what this does, by giving the tenant this information, it gives the tenant the opportunity under the law to contest the reasons that the landlord has given. The tenant may say, this really doesn't constitute work that can't be accomplished while I'm there. This doesn't constitute work that can't be accomplished within 30 days. You're not acting in good faith when you say it's going to take more than 30 days, or you're not acting in good faith when you say, I need to move out, because all you're really doing is repairing this one little room, and I can be living in this other section. It doesn't interfere with my occupancy. Also remember, if it's a habitability issue, the tenant has the right under current state law to require the repairs, and the landlord has to address those in a way that's different than the just cause eviction ordinance. It may have to put the tenant up temporarily in a hotel, provide temporary accommodations while the landlord repairs the situation that causes the unit to be not habitable. And finally, the last thing is that a copy of all of the documents that are served on the tenant in order to accomplish the what I'm going to say, use the word renoviction, have to be provided to the Community Development Department. And why the Community Development Department? That's our code enforcement branch for building and zoning violations. And so that was where they were given to. In a nutshell, that's what everything that the council did. It was significant. I'm not going to say that's all the council did, but it was also very simple and acted against the existing law that was already on the books. I noticed that Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez is on the Zoom call. He was at the meeting. He was one of the council members that unanimously adopted the new provisions. I will also say that the city attorney's office is charged with bringing actions if necessary to enforce the law. A violation by a landlord is a punishable offense that's prosecuted by the city attorney's office. I did ask our city prosecutor how it would be best to get information to him in case there's a situation that arises that you need to file a complaint. And what he indicated was that the best way to do it is to give the information by email to our city investigator. I don't have a slide showing his email address, but his name is William Alva. His email address is WALVA@santabarbaraca.gov. And William is our investigator. He's able to take, and William is also bilingual. And so if there's an individual that needs to give him the information in Spanish, he's able to take that information as well. That concludes everything I wanted to tell you. I'm happy to answer any questions. I will say that I cannot give private legal advice. I cannot give you advice on any specific application of the law to any specific circumstances. And I am not the city prosecutor. I am one of the legal advisors that does other kind of work, the civil side of the work. But I'll try my best to answer any questions that you might have. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Dan. We only have a couple minutes. Are there any questions for Dan while he's with us? I'll say we wanted to share this because one of the most resource effective ways that we can address issues of homelessness is to prevent it before it happens. And so these kind of changes in our governance affect that very much. And so we want to keep abreast of what's happening. I see a chat from Lucille in the chat window, which reminds me also the county also implemented some restrictions around evictions, around renovations as well. And with all this, we also want to encourage that if anyone knows of someone who is having any sort of dispute with their landlord, to be in touch with the City of Santa Barbara's rental housing mediation program. That's a great resource for all of our tenants and landlords.